I'm going to show you how to make REST API calls to Aria automation. Let's get started.
Hi everyone, I'm Watrous from VVork. If this is your first time here and you want to learn about automating, programming, and monitoring in VMware environments, you're in the right place.
This is part 9 in a 10-part video series in which we're exploring how to make REST API calls. In parts 1 through 8, we took a generic look at how to make REST API calls. But now, in parts 9 and onwards, we're going to take a look at specific VMware products. In part 9, we're going to be taking a look at how to make REST API calls to VMware Aria automation.
2 videos ago, back in part 9K, we saw how you could look up information about your deployments in Aria automation using our REST API. And that's very useful. But the REST operations provided by our API related to deployments aren't just useful when you first do the deployment. They're useful throughout the entire life cycle of your deployments. So what we're going to be taking a look at in this particular video is a single REST request that's going to allow you to see historical information about what's been going on with the deployment long after you initially deploy it. So let's take a look at this in more detail in the lab environment. As you can see, I'm logged into the GUI for Aria automation. The reason why I've done so is I would like to show you here in the GUI what it is we're trying to look up. So notice here I have 3 different deployments, and we're just going to focus on this topmost deployment called CentOS VM from API-inputs. When you work with deployments, after you've done the deployment, you can do things to that deployment. For example, you can change the lease of this deployment. In fact, I've already done that. I changed the lease from unlimited to 2 days from now, September 10th. In addition, as you can see, there are other actions that we can perform on the entire deployment. In addition to deployment level actions, we can also open up a deployment, select a resource. By the way, you can also do deployment actions up here. But if you select a resource such as this machine, then go to that machine's actions drop-down list, we have various day 2 operations you can perform, such as shutting down a machine, which I'm looking for here, and I expect to find grayed out because before doing this video, I have already shut down this VM. So I've performed 2 different operations. I have changed the lease on the entire deployment, and I have shut down this one machine. If we're in the GUI, you can see information about what's been going on with this machine by looking at its historical record, by going to the History tab. So initially, I did the deployment. I created all the resources. After that, I changed the lease. And after that, I shut down the machine. So we created the deployment, we changed the lease of the entire deployment, and we shut down a single machine. So with that in mind, let's go over to Postman and take a look at this REST request. This REST request asks that you specify a deployment ID. So again, my deployment ID is currently set up. Let me double check this here. Yep. So 9 Bravo Echo Echo is my deployment on the top of this list here called CentOS VM from API-inputs. So my deployment ID is set correct, and my URL says something slightly different here. The endpoint URL now says /events. If we hit send, you'll notice we get back information. Let me copy, after checking the status code, let me copy this. And you know the drill. I'm going to go over to Notepad++. I'm going to type Control-N, Control-V, Control-Shift-P, Control-Shift-J, and Alt-0 for good measure. And let's see what we've got. So we expand. Most everything here has to do with the paging feature of Aria automation. Again, numerous videos ago we talked about paging, but let's ignore those and focus on the content array. This content array has 3 elements. That rings a bell. Here is an event, here is another event, and here is a third event. That's why our array has 3 elements in it. If we take a look at these, I assume they're in chronological order, but is it oldest first or oldest last? I don't know. Let's expand 0 and find out. So element 0 here looks like it's the most recent event that was performed. The most recent thing I did was to shut down the VM. Looking reverse chronologically over in the GUI, I expect that array element 1 is going to be change lease, and element 2 is going to be create the deployment. Let's go over and double check that. So here comes element 1. Element 1 is changing the lease, exactly as we expected. And element 2 is the creating of the deployment originally. And as you can see, for each of these events, we can see whether they're successful or failed and so forth. Plus, there's loads of additional information about what's going on. One further thing I'd like to point out is, notice in this create event, if we look at inputs, you can see the blueprint inputs that we fed in. On the other hand, other events, if we go to content element 1, it too, again, this is the one for changing the lease, it too has an input property. Notice that its inputs are not the blueprint inputs. This is the input to the change lease operation. So don't always assume that inputs is talking about blueprint inputs. This input is specifically for reminding us of the fact that I specified that I want my lease to end 2 days from now on September 10th of 2023. All right, we've gone through quite a journey here to get to this point. So now we've talked about deployments. In the next set of videos, we're going to learn how you can find out information about your infrastructure in Aria Automation. So as I suspect you already know, to set up your infrastructure, you need to create things such as projects and cloud accounts and things like that. So join me in the next video and we'll dig down deeper.
Join me in the next video and we'll continue looking at the Aria Automation API.